Hello again. Today we shall make a new video. And by we, I mean me. And by new video, I mean a video on the topic of reasons for suffrage. Now, hold on a sec. There you go. I've adjusted slightly the camera's angle. Now, getting started, let's think about it for a second. Suffrage is the right to vote. So, why should we give people suffrage? Now, one might say, oh, well, it's just a good thing to do, or it's democratic. Well, why does democracy matter? If we could run a society entirely on the diktats of one man or a woman, and they did everything for their people, successfully running the state, making sure that everyone's fed, clothed, and has a good life, well, would it really be better if they had an elected council they had to adhere to? Especially if, say, the industrialists were able to fund certain people on those councils to get things the way they want? Would democracy really be that good in that instance? No, democracy is not an inherent good. When we talked about democracy in a past video, that is a very real thing that we had to acknowledge. But also, there's another matter, and it comes down to, under what justification are we giving out suffrage? Is suffrage egalitarian? Well, let's think about it for a second. Here we have a system where the majority rules, meaning if a minority wants a policy, but they don't win the vote, then that policy will not be implemented. Think about it. If you gave the 1960s Americans, every single one of them, suffrage, and they were all allowed to vote on the Civil Rights Act, do you think it would pass? Honestly, think about it. With how many people were discriminatory in that time period of the 60s, do you think the Civil Rights Act would pass? Really think about it for a second. Is there an inherent equality in the will of the majority deciding the fate of everyone? Imagine two wolves and a sheep deciding what is to be eaten for dinner. Would that be equal? No. So, is suffrage egalitarian? No, it isn't. Not in the slightest. Well then, what does suffrage do? The biggest justification I can think of is quite simple. It allows for tensions to naturally decrease. For pressure buildup to lower, spread out, not be as dangerous. Because think about it, if you're ruled by one man or an oligarchy of people who directly say we are in charge, well then, in such a situation, how do you address your grievances? Do you get to decide for yourself? No. So you go up to them and you either petition them, or you pull out a gun and start shooting. You try to use what wheels of power you have, but without suffrage, there's no direct way for a person to say, hey, I think this would be better, and try to push for it. Because a petition is not required to be followed. We have a right to petition and redress our grievances in the United States, but that does not mean that petition is going to go through. In a monarchy, an autocracy of any kind, really, or an oligarchy, that's straight up not just a secret oligarchy, in such societies, there is no such thing. You are not required to address a petition. It could be decided by every single other person in the country, but the king of whatever country you are living in is not required to fulfill that petition. But, for the same reason as it's advised that people do accept such petitions, by allowing people to vote, you effectively allow them to sort of have another alternative. Things may not change. You may still get two establishment parties that largely agree with each other, like during the New Dealer era, there was very little difference, honestly, between the Republicans and Democrats during that time in terms of policies. The Republicans were slightly more conservative, but that's about it, really. The two parties were very similar after the New Deal. So it didn't really help anything, but because there was the ability to vote, that ability that people felt like they had some input, they were able to basically lessen the tensions that were going through a, let's face it, very turbulent time period. The 50s had the start of the Cold War and a lot of escalation. Meanwhile, the 60s was full of battles, including the Civil Rights era. And then, of course, there's the 70s, which was just a poop show from start to finish. But because of suffrage, it allowed those tensions during those time periods to be concentrated and then lessened. They weren't going to explode after a lot of buildup because people had their ability to vote. So they thought, okay, there's no reason to get violent here. We'll just wait till the next election. If you didn't like Kennedy, well, just wait till the next election, then you can vote Kennedy out. Don't like Nixon? Wait till the next election. That mentality of we can just wait allows for places with suffrage to have more stable governance. Because there's no inherent belief of, well, this guy's just going to rule forever. And so people are less worried about, okay, this guy's bad, so we need to remove him immediately, and are more focused on, okay, when his time comes to be traded out, what are we going to do? It allows the losers to focus more on the next election, while the winners get to be happy in their victory. Now, of course, it doesn't always work. For example, a lot of people think Trump's going to become a dictator. I would object to such a notion, but when you have people believing every single thing that they believe, sometimes those things included in that everything are freaking insane. Like, I don't want to talk honestly, but regardless. That ability to essentially say, just wait for the next election, allows for voters to not feel as, well, worried for themselves, because they think, next election I'll just vote in the new guy. It may not change much, but it means that it's not going to be a violent coup. Because those violent coups are, well, violent. They're brutal. Now, in the United States, it doesn't always work like that. For example, take the Civil War in the 1860s. Now, I could go on and on about the Civil War. In fact, I'll probably make my own video about it just to clear up the whole situation regarding it. But the reason the Civil War kicked off was, yes, slavery, but also the fact that there was no belief in getting out of this because the South had viewed itself as in a corner. For the South, cutting off the expansion of slavery was the same thing as making sure it dies. And so there was no, we need to wait for the next election, or we can wait. It was do or die for the Southern planter class. So what did they do? Well, simple. Since they were the guys in charge of most of the governments in the South, they started leaving and relied heavily on associations with states' rights to pull in the moderates. Thus, the Civil War occurred. Forgive me for the bad drawings, but and so it was that the South seceded from the North. This is probably a very bad drawing, but, you know, it works. Just draw a little river up here. Woo! That's a very bad drawing in the South. But you know what? It works. It's funny. It's horrible. Anyways, back to the point. So part of the reason that one can justify suffrage, and what I support it for, is the idea of relieving tensions. In fact, we actually see this with another society, the Holy Roman Empire, and the many, many German peoples inside of it. Despite having, let's face it, a very turbulent history, for one, because they were the center of Europe at the time geographically, but also because during the feudal system's existence, there was a lot of internal competition between nobility. The Holy Roman Empire was very fragmented, very weak, especially at the end. But the reason it maintained itself for so long was the simple fact of, we can always just vote in a new guy. For example, the HRE had the Habsburgs basically get elected back to back to back as Holy Roman Emperors. But if you didn't like the Habsburg rule, you could always just, Maybe vote for Wittelsbach, or Hohenzollern, or Luxembourg. There were many other options that you could theoretically vote for if you so desired. And that allowed for the HRE to relieve tensions, especially during periods of great unrest, such as the religious turmoil followed by the Protestant Reformation. Now, there is another justification for the right to suffrage, and that's the ability to bleed for your country. Now, what this means is fairly straightforward. It's military service. If a person has the ability to volunteer and throw their life in the name of the country away, do they not have a right to say, hey, I would like to not die? Well, technically, they have the right to say it. Doesn't mean it's really going to matter. But if you are fully capable of joining the military, then it stands to reason, at least in part, that you should be able to say, or through voting infer to others, that you do not want this to happen, because you are willing to put your life's blood on the line for this country, and so you should have a say in it. After all, if a guard can just be treated like a pawn to be thrown away, what sense does it make to keep being paid and serving this owner? Well, not an owner, but still. The principle still holds. Because as the people who are fighting and dying for the country, soldiers, naturally, should have some influence over decision-making. Essentially saying, hey, before you start your next war, maybe consider making sure our lives are freaking worth it when you go shove them in a meat grinder. Because it's one thing to say, oh, well, we're born here, so we should have a say, when most people just passively receive the benefits rather than actually gaining any level of experience on how to properly run the country. But it is no question with military service. Now, I do not believe in universal conscription. As a matter of fact, I don't believe in conscription at all. But even just having the ability to serve your country is, in my opinion, a good justification for suffrage, because even if you don't, you understand perfectly well, I, or someone my age, could be, and possibly is, currently fighting and dying in the name of my country. Now, will all people take that as a good thing? No. Will all people take it as something to think about? Probably not even. People are lazy and like to pretend like the musketeer and the man who decides to bleed his lifeblood are not worth it. Heck, I believe there was a famous instance where someone said, soldiers deserve to have PTSD, or they wish that they did. Frankly, disgusting to say that people deserve to be trauma shocked. But, hey, what was her name? I believe it was Frogan. Yes. Still, as disgraceful as that woman is, we cannot deny the fact that when you know your life could be put at risk, you are far more likely to make a choice based on caution, and thus a more reasoned choice. When you're not at risk of anything, you don't care. It's purely based on emotion at that point, unless you have a really, really hyper-rational personality. Because if you don't feel the consequences of your actions, why would you freaking care? If you don't have to worry about your image being tarnished, and if you can take credit when things go well, it doesn't freaking matter what you do. But when you know, oh right, I could be bleeding right now, I could be dying, that puts a lot of things into perspective. And that's a really important thing. So I would argue minimum age for service should be the voting age. It actually compounds with what I said up here, with lessening tensions as well. Because the minimum age for service is almost always the age you're allowed to buy a firearm. Now, it depends on the country, but for the US, it is a good benchmark, and it is commonly used to decide when you're allowed to buy certain things, like rifles. As such, it makes sense to, in order to prevent very angry young people with access to firearms from starting a little coup because they don't like the situation to give them voting rights. I will say it bluntly, 16-year-olds should not vote. I also don't believe we should raise the voting age as of now. If we raise the age of military service, I could be on board with that. I frankly think a lot of people are dumb. So I would not blame people for saying it should be like 21 or something. But so long as people are able to own firearms and can serve their country and die for it, they should be able to vote. Plain and simple. Because the threat that it proposes if we don't allow them is massive, and simultaneously, it's a good way to basically tell people, hey, since you could risk your life, here's a reward. It's a reward for service, essentially, or theoretical service. Now, some people just take advantage. Things happen. That's just life. But it is a good reason to just, do things. Now, here's the following question. Why shouldn't people have suffrage? So we talked about why people should. Now, why shouldn't they? It's just a little devil's advocate here. I do not believe in taking people's voting rights away. Plain and simply, it's just a waste of freaking time. Well, let's start off with the number one reason. People are freaking stupid. There are people who treat it like a game. I vote this way because that's the color I like, or I vote this way because I voted for that party 20 years ago. It's sports to them. They're fools. But they still do it. And now a lot of people make stupid decisions, even now, without that reasoning, basing it purely on what the news tells them. But there's another thing. Especially for the young, people don't know what they're voting on. You may say, oh, well, I've read about this and what this news source says about this. Could be third party, could be mainstream. But they don't really understand what they're voting on. For example, if I said tariffs can help domestic industries, but they hurt overall for the economy, someone may understand rationally why that is, especially if they understand the basis of competition, but most people aren't. Furthermore, if I say C plus I plus G plus X minus IM equals Y, do you think the vast majority of people are going to know what the freak I'm talking about? No. They don't know what GDP is and how it's calculated, other than the fact that it's a number that says money. They do not understand economics and foreign trade. They don't understand how minimum wage works, how workers' rights work, unions, all that. All they hear is platitudes. It could be unions bad because it's messing with your property, or unions good because they help the worker. It doesn't matter which side you're on, left, right, center. You could be the most totalitarian person or the most libertarian person. Would not change the fact that a lot of people do not understand the actual theory and practice of what they are advocating for. I guarantee you, if you asked 100 Republicans and 100 Democrats, 90% of them aren't going to understand half the positions that they hold. Now, you'll get a bit higher when you go to Libertarians and the Greens, because those are fringe parties who generally only get noticed if someone's actually thinking a bit more about politics. But even still, there's going to be a fair few who just think, well, this just sounds good, like, oh, Libertarians are the party of freedom, so of course I'll side with them, or, oh, the Greens support the environment, I'm going to vote for them. See, there are always going to be those who don't understand what's going on, but go along just because, well, they think it sounds good. And this should be hammered home with the two combined. People aren't rational. They aren't. If you told a person that you have one person who is running for office and they have policies that, they sort of agree with, but they're a bad person, and you have another whose policies you disagree with, but, they're really nice, they explain things well and kindly. Most people are straight up going to vote for the second despite hating their policies if they actually looked into it. But, supposedly people are going to make the right call. Do they? No. I ask you this, Dems. If people make rational decisions, how is it that Trump managed to make a majority, not just a majority in the Electoral College, a popular majority of votes in the last election? For the Republicans in the room as well. How many people voted for Biden? Even if we assume that some of the votes were fake, let's say 75 million was the true amount, not dealing fudging. I'm, of course, making up that number, but let's say it is. That's 75 million of your fellow countrymen who, despite supposedly being rational, voted for a person who you believe is completely wrong, or at the very least has a lot of bad policies. Facing that fact, both sides have demonstrated that they do not have rational members among them. Most people aren't. That is the vast majority of your voter base. And so why does it make sense for a person who barely understands how the economy works, who barely understands political protocol and getting things done, why does it make sense for them to have a say in what goes on and making sure that millions of people live their lives? Because some things sound good. For example, banning price gouging sounds good. But is it? No, it's just another form of price controls. And we've seen from basically every country that's tried it, it doesn't work. The Nazis tried it. They suffered for it. The Romans tried it. They suffered for it. The Soviets tried it. Suffered for it. Argentina. They're removing it now and they're having a better time because of it. Venezuela, price controls, same thing. If you're trying to ban price gouging, how do you determine what's price gouging? Do you just say, oh, it's this arbitrary percentage above how much you think it costs? So you're trying to control the price. It is by definition price controls, yet if you ask most people, they'll say, yeah, that sounds like a great plan. Banning price gouging sounds great. But it's not practical and it's just going to fail. Most people don't understand this. Most people don't understand a lot of things. People do not make good calls. And it's also important to note, sometimes it's better to have a few skilled people. The reason we gravitate towards elites, why we have an iron law of oligarchy, is because not everyone wants to get involved or has the capability. So it's often easier to find a small group of people who are skilled or at least have enough charisma to work with the skilled people to try to plan, manage, and otherwise handle situations. Government's the same way. Trump is an elite. So is Harris, so is Biden, so is AOC. Every single person who is standing in that political stage likely has a lot of connections. Oh, who am I kidding? They almost all do. And they naturally have a lot of influence. They are elites, by definition. And them being elites is not a problem. It's inevitable. Because how are they supposed to work and maintain this society that they are supposed to be running? Well, they can't be focused on other things. They gotta be focused on the law. Now, we may argue how well they do that, but that's just how things are. Oligarchy is natural. How blatant it is, isn't. Some will just straight up say, yeah, we got an oligarchy in charge of our country. Others will say, no, we're democratic, we allow people to vote. But funnily enough, both parties all have elites who are running for office. Funny that. Sometimes it is legitimately best to just let a few skilled people handle a situation. Those who have the know-how handle the problem, and things are resolved. All this to say, going purely democratic is foolish. Even in a trade union, the idea of everyone running the business, in like a co-op, is a foolish idea. Sure, I can understand the vision and why someone would say, want everyone to have a say, but a lot of the time most just don't care. For a lot of workers, it's just a matter of, do I keep my livelihood and get paid? Yeah? Okay, good. I'm satisfied. So it's better to have a few skilled people who know what they're doing when it comes to management on many occasions than it is to just have everyone with their hand in the pot. Simultaneously, I still believe in suffrage. I understand the necessity for an oligarchy and concentration of powers, But at the same time, we cannot deny the risk that comes with people feeling unrepresented and so deciding to take things out on the current administration, whatever that administration is. Political violence hurts everybody and should not be promoted under any circumstances. So we should always say no to political violence. Under any circumstances, this should not happen. Unless it is legitimately a totalitarian dictatorship, we should not be resorting to violence to resolve our internal struggles, because it hurts everyone. And having suffrage allows for us to avoid political violence while still changing the landscape and nudging things in one direction. It is a form of negotiation between the few skilled and the many below. So let suffrage exist. But at the same time, acknowledge the importance of letting others just run how things are. The few and the many must cooperate, or else we all fall.